Linda Harris Donaldson McCullough was Centerville's unexpected, omnipresent queen. She held this title for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days, minus a few hours or so. Whether she deserved it or not didn't matter. Being Daniel McCullough's wife gave her access to all the benefits and privileges of everything the city had to offer, which in hindsight was nothing more than smoke and memories. Of course, there were clubs and meetings with their places of honor and prestige, all of which mattered to those who valued any sense of social status. Of course, there was money. Daniel was richer than any other soul, not only in the city, but in the whole county. It was family money, and it was almost as old as the house he grew up in. The McCulloughs were accustomed to winning and achieving success, and when it was not achieved through hard work, planning, or luck, it was achieved through deception and cunning. Linda was used to her good looks and nothing else, or so she thought until she came across Daniel McCullough's interest. She did not suffer from a lack of sustenance or material goods, but the noble wealth was the grass on the other side of the fence, or, in this case, a few stone walls and miles to the east. Until then, her home had been comfortable with all the amenities of a respectable middle-class existence. That is, until she did the tripping trick. "Jesus, girl, you could fall flat on your beautiful ass," Daniel McCullough told her after he caught her in his arms when she tripped. Linda looked into the face of the man who was holding her and thanked him profusely. "Seriously, you should be more careful here. It could have been a nasty fall." "I don't know what I was thinking, sir." "I'm really sorry, but thank you so much for catching me the way you did. That would be really bad." Linda smiled, looking into the man's smiling face. After composing herself, adjusting her tight skirt and high heels, Linda turned back to the imposing polished brass door as Daniel McCullough held the door open for the attractive woman entering his domain. He didn't know who she was, but he knew right away that he wanted her, even if it was just to enjoy the forbidden fruit under her too short skirt. The sparkling ring on her left hand was largely unremarkable in his mind, even if it was of paramount importance to some other man. The McCulloughs took what they wanted, and Daniel was well trained in their predatory ways. Once inside, the fox turned right and the prey moved left towards a bank of elevators to continue on its way to the offices of Ladson McCullough Sperry. There was an advertisement in the morning paper for an administrative assistant position at a firm offering modest salary and benefits for Monday through Friday work, which seemed a good fit for Linda's talents and ambitions. "Mrs. Donaldson, I am sure that we will come to a comfortable agreement on the details, and we will review all your documents later, but I am sure that for now I would like to welcome you to the firm." The old man sealed these words with his handshake and wandering gaze. As she sat in the chair opposite, Tom Ladson could hardly restrain himself from drooling down his spotted chin. Linda's skirt rode up high, revealing an inappropriate expanse of smooth thighs. He may have been an old man well into his 70s, but his memory still excited him, even if his physical capabilities limited him in his current state. On the other hand, Daniel McCullough watched the negotiations between them with more than curiosity. There was something about this woman that aroused him more than sexual interest. Her beauty was intoxicating, and the manner in which she presented herself innocently increased the desire to possess her as his own. He looked longingly through the two-way glass mirror on the wall at the raven-haired beauty as she crossed her legs and smiled, the very rise of her breasts with every breath drawing his eyes to the beautiful sight. "Thank you, Mr. Ladson. I'm so happy to work for you, and I'm sure I won't disappoint you." She stood up from her seat and Ladson led her into another room for the show, and Daniel stood there rooted to the spot, intoxicated with lust and desire. Tom didn't hire her for himself. She was going to work for Dave Sperry, the other senior partner, or at least that was the plan. For the rest of the day, she reported directly to Daniel McCullough, the firm's managing senior partner. Mrs. Linda Donaldson was the 30-year-old stunningly beautiful wife for 10 years of a rather simple man with simple tastes, Liam Donaldson. She came from a humble family and before these events had never shown any outward interest in privileged things. Liam was a middle manager for a small manufacturer on the outskirts of town with a salary and expectations of more when time and experience allowed. The house was pleasant, with plenty of space, a patio, and a pool added for frequent entertaining among their friends and neighbors. Linda and her husband had moved here from a larger city for a factory job a few years earlier, and Linda had left a decent position at a law firm for her husband's more lucrative job. However, boredom set in, and she decided she needed to get back to work. For Daniel McCullough, Linda's boredom turned out to be an opportunity for both of them, and ultimately at Liam's expense. Linda was that woman, and I was Liam, her ex-husband. I suppose in some respects I could be considered a simple man. This was certainly McCullough's unfounded opinion of me, and I guess it must have largely been Linda's, since she left me for that asshole. In any case, I survived unharmed. Linda began working for McCullough the following Monday after her interview and had settled into her role quite well, judging by her demeanor. At first, it was a job from 8 Lauern to 17 Lauern, but after a few months, everything changed. She started working a couple of evenings during the week and returned home around 9 or 10 p.m. I spent enough time at the plant that I couldn't complain too much. Regardless of the work week, we were together every weekend, and life continued to be good. Or at least, it seemed so. About 6 months after she started working at the firm, I finally met her boss. I wasn't looking forward to it, but it was the annual Christmas party, and it was held on the McCullough family farm a couple of miles outside of town. It was an old house with an attached garage and barn sitting on top of a hill overlooking rolling fields, woods, and meadows beyond. High, neat stone walls guarded the owner as you drove up the road to the entrance. Linda wore a dark blue dress with a mid-thigh slit, an open back, and a wide cleavage in the front. The heels highlighted her long legs, and her dark hair was pulled back into a tight French braid. The look was completed with a single strand of white pearls. I simply put on a white shirt with dark pants and polished cowboy boots along with my usual smile. We argued about it a little before we left, but eventually Linda just raised her hands and we left. We were greeted at the door of the mansion by a polite young lady who led us into the living room along with several other guests, and we were greeted by the charming Mr. Daniel McCullough himself. Apparently, there was no Mrs. McCullough, something my wife had not mentioned for the past few months. "Linda, I'm so glad you came," he said, hugging my wife and kissing her on the lips. "You must be Linda's husband, Liam." "I've heard so much about you," he told me, taking my hand in his and trying to assert his dominance. Our palms met, and when he squeezed his hand with unnecessary force, I returned the squeeze doubly, all the while assessing this stranger, not taking my eyes off him. He shouldn't have kissed my wife on the lips. I felt him involuntarily loosen his grip. "Yes, I'm Liam. Nice to meet you." I lied, looking him straight in the eyes. He shouldn't have kissed my wife. McCullough led us and a few others through the house into a large hall where we socialized, chatted, and entertained each other with stories of our lives. Luckily, some of the guests were quite interesting and I really enjoyed it, so much so that I lost track of my wife for a while. I looked around a couple of times and just assumed she had gone off with one of the other women, so I turned my attention back to the guys I was chatting with. After about an hour, Linda slid into my hand and returned to her role as an obedient wife next to her husband. I asked her where she went, and she just said, "Normal girl talk." We left soon after, and when we got home, she excused herself and took a quick shower before going to bed. This was the beginning of my decline as a respected husband, although, as in many cases, it was gradual until I was pushed into the abyss. Over the next few months, Linda became something of a stranger, culminating in the blue-white heat of lightning striking the center of the kitchen table in the shape of a manila envelope. I knew we had been growing apart lately, but I ignored the ominous signs. Linda worked longer and longer hours, adding a Saturday for good measure. I was passed over for the position of general production manager because of the plant manager's favoritism. This was not entirely unexpected, but in Linda's opinion, it simply reinforced her perception of our existence as unworthy of her, a perception of which I was completely unaware. Maybe all the signs were there and I was just too ignorant to see them. Perhaps the Christmas party and its convenient disappearance should have provided a glimpse of the disaster brewing just on my horizon. Looking back, I realized that I was just a happy, blind idiot with a beautiful wife caught in the crosshairs of a depraved predator. She was not at home. Everything was tidy and nothing looked out of place. The only thing that greeted me was this damn envelope lying in the middle of the table. I looked at the letterhead and began to tense up. In the top left corner it said, Ladson, McCullough, Sperry, and below it was just my name. I carefully opened it and laid out the contents on the table. There is some truth to the concept of fearful immobility. I learned that the soul can remain motionless, despite the fact that all the senses are excited for some response. The last item out of the envelope, and the one I almost missed among the papers, was the small diamond engagement ring I gave Linda over 10 years ago. It belonged to my mother, who died when I was 17, and my father gave it to me when I told him I was going to propose to Linda. It was a simple family heirloom, but nonetheless precious to me. When I saw this, I didn't need to know anymore, but I read it anyway. It was a petition for divorce signed by her. Interestingly, she didn't ask for anything other than cash, which she had already taken. There were 3 sets of documents, one for me, and the other 2 needed to be signed, notarized, and sent to court. I sat in a chair, looked at the documents, and felt nothing but emptiness, an abyss. There were no tears, but there was a lot of rage. It was an easy decision for me. I stood up, grabbed the papers, a box of matches, and went out onto the patio. Every piece of paper went into the fire. I burned it all with rage. "Fuck you, Linda! It won't end like this!" I screamed inside my gutted shell. I didn't know where she was. Her mobile phone did not answer. Her whole family was a couple 100 miles away. It was 2 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. The polished brass door to Ladson, McCullough, Sperry swung open easily, and the click of cowboy boots and the vapor of several glasses of cognac floated after me as I stood at her empty desk. "Where the hell is she?" I didn't ask anyone in particular. A couple of office workers hurried away, perhaps in search of an alarm or a bomb shelter. "She's not here, and if you were half as smart as the leather in your boots, you'd get the hell out of here." He stood and looked at me in his polished Brooks Bros boots and $2,000 suit. Mr. Daniel Patrick McCullough himself. His haircut and slender figure only emphasized what a jerk he really was. "What the hell do you mean when you say she's not here?" "She works here, doesn't she?" When the corners of his mouth began to lift into McCullough's grin, I recognized my nemesis. In the back of my mind, I remembered the missed hour of the Christmas party, and then all of her long evening hours away from home, working hard for her boss. "Donaldson, you can leave now or they will escort you out. Linda is in a safe place, and you no longer have the right to interfere in her affairs." I started to let my common sense get the better of me and started to turn towards the door. Then he made this sound. It was that nasty, puckering sound of a kiss, loud enough for me to hear, a sound that made me sound like a weakling. When I turned, his smile turned into a smirk, and then he made the mistake of opening his mouth and speaking almost in a whisper. "This tidbit is now mine. Get out of my office. Stupidity comes in different brands and flavors." His mouth was disgusting and dirty. My hand was hard and bloody. When I got to him, his shirt was in my hand and my other hand was beating the crap out of his eyes and nasty mouth. I saw blood and saliva along with teeth on the floor, but I wasn't done yet. The heel of my middle-class cowboy boot found his crotch, and whatever pleasure it gave my unfaithful wife would have to wait a while. But before I could completely destroy his manhood, my world plunged into darkness. Staring at the ceiling in a punishment cell is a favorite pastime of every soul who graces a prison establishment with their presence. The sickly color of its putrid pea soup green walls and the bright lights hidden behind rusty wire mesh do nothing to soothe the prisoner's condition. The loud, unpleasant clanging of the steel doors, locking its occupants inside for another round of bad food and bad company, is a constant throughout the day. The only lull in activity comes around 1 a.m. or so, when newcomers to the Iron Resort are kept downstairs in the reception center until processing in the morning. I sat there for 2 days and 20 minutes, waiting first for a magistrate hearing and then for a couple of hours until my lawyer negotiated bail. It cost me $5,000, but finally, late Friday night, I walked out into the sunshine and a new fucking world. Liam, look, I know this is fucking embarrassing, but I want you to stay out of your way and stay out of any trouble. Do you hear me? Jake Reynolds told me this over beers that night. Jake was the guy who hired me 3 years ago and has been my mentor since day one, and I have nothing but the deepest respect for the old man. He looked out from under his deep-set eyes and bushy eyebrows, sipping the double whiskey that was always placed in front of him. That fucking McCulloch will kill you if you're not careful, young man. He and his ilk pretty much own everyone and everything in this city, including the damn judge. I talked to the old man about it and he agreed to keep me on board no matter what. Apparently, there is some animosity between him and McCulloch that goes back to when he built this plant 10 years ago. I don't know the whole story, but there's damn sure no love connection between them. I thank the old man immensely for staying with me. More than likely, I was facing some serious jail time before it was over, but my lawyer thought I could get away with a year in county jail and a couple years of probation if I was lucky. If this were not so, I could have received 5 years in a medium security correctional facility. Keeping my nose clean was crucial. I bought another portion for each of us, and we parted for the night. I did something with Daniel McCulloch, and it took him a while to come around. Judging by the neighbors' stories, the bastard had a broken cheekbone, several front teeth knocked out, and his eyes remained blackened for a long time. The main problem for him was that I broke one of his nuts, and the other one was unreliable. I have no idea how people get this information, but at least it was nice to think that I had achieved something for all the trouble he got me into. As for Linda, I had a restraining order preventing me from doing almost anything to do with her or McCulloch. I learned that she lived on the McCulloch farm and apparently still worked in a law office. Restraining orders have been a problem in a city like ours, this small town. I couldn't be within 500 feet of her, that idiot, or their offices. This meant I couldn't even drive down Main Street or eat at the 3 restaurants located in the heart of the city. Technically, simply going to court would violate the order. That first weekend back from prison was a difficult time. Being an idiot for not seeing it coming to me didn't help me at all in getting over the loss of the woman I loved like no one else for 10 years. During those 2 days, I shed a lot of tears alone and drank a lot of booze. But on Monday morning, I returned to work, and I must say that I was pleasantly surprised by the reception I received. Everyone seemed to be quite delighted with my reaction when some idiot stole my wife. Even a few of the women at the factory stopped by to see how I was doing. I didn't mean to act in the wounded emotional state I was in, but it was comforting and a boost to my male ego. My trial was scheduled in 3 weeks, and the time really flew by. I avoided trouble by no longer seeing both adulterers, and my lawyer and I went to court on a cool Monday morning. Several of my colleagues were in the room, and McCulloch and Linda were sitting behind the district attorney. McCulloch just stared at me, while Linda stared almost catatonic, lifelessly at her hands. My lawyer met with the prosecutor last week, and they reached a plea agreement that I didn't expect, but was better than the alternative 5 years. I would turn myself into the county jail to serve a 1-year sentence, suspended for 4 years on good behavior. I also had to pay McCulloch $22 in compensation for medical expenses. The bastard was a millionaire, so it was all bullshit. But of course I agreed. The only catch was that the judge added 1 extra day to my sentence. It didn't sound like much, but my lawyer objected, and it was quickly overruled. This meant that I had to serve the entire 12 months and 1 day in jail without parole. Otherwise, I could be released on good behavior after serving 244 days. Linda didn't look at me, but I saw tears on her cheeks. No explanation, no words that she was sorry, nothing but her damn tears. Well, that's all I remember about that feeling. Jake told me he would look after the house while I served my sentence. The house was already paid for, and I had enough saved to take care of taxes, insurance, and anything else that came up. I gave in the following Monday morning and began my time with pea soup green walls in the company of 28 other baddies, watched over by 6 prison guards. There were 2 other prisoners with me in a shared cell for 6 people, so we had enough space to spread out. One of the guys was sentenced to 30 days for drunk driving, and the other was serving 60 days for possession of marijuana. I think the worst offender in this place was me. 3 months into my stay, I received a divorce decree. I could have fought it, but my lawyer and I decided it would be a waste of time while I was in jail. The only good thing about all of this was that Linda still only had the cash she had taken the day she left the papers on the kitchen table. I still had my house, my savings, and everything else we had accumulated in our 10 years of marriage. I had visitors 3 or 4 times a week, mostly people from the plant, and a couple of my neighbors came by a few times. It broke the monotony and helped make the stay bearable, and it also reinforced the knowledge that I had friends who cared. About halfway through my stay, I was reading the newspaper and discovered that Linda and this idiot had gotten married in a ceremony and reception at McCulloch Farm with half the town in attendance. There was a large photograph of the bride and groom. She was wearing a flowing white wedding dress with a train that was at least 15 feet long. McCulloch must have gotten some new teeth because he was smiling. The worst happened later, and I realized how much influence McCulloch had on people with power and influence. It was around 11:30 p.m. on Saturday night, just after the night crew had gone on duty. Prison wardens were mostly appointed by county commissioners, most of whom were in Daniel McCulloch's pocket. I heard screams and yells in the common area and got up from my bunk to see what was going on. Several prisoners were gathered around a large wall-mounted television in the corner, engrossed in watching a movie. It was a sexually explicit video and as graphic as it gets. The boys became increasingly rowdy as the video became increasingly lewd. He turned to the camera, which was probably on a dresser or something, and said the words I had already heard, "This tidbit is now mine." Daniel McCulloch just grinned and turned back to my ex-wife. The prisoners continued to shout and encourage the couple, and I returned to my bunk. My 2 roommates had long since been released, and I was left to my own devices. It was good because it was a rough night. For the first time in months, I had tears in my eyes and troubled sleep. The taunts of a couple of jailers the next morning nearly pushed me over the edge, but somehow I let it go and focused on my life. I had 4 months left, and then I would go out into the sunlight again with a clean nose. One thing the video made clear to me was that my cheating wife didn't leave me for sexual thrills. Daniel McCulloch didn't offer much to make women gasp, at least from what I could see. What Linda Harris Donaldson McCulloch acquired was wealth, and it was apparently worth more than 10 years with a devoted husband. Punish her was all I remember thinking about for the last 4 months I was there, and not a single thought about it was sexual. The county let me go with my old clothes and the smile of the girl behind the counter. Her husband worked with me at the plant. My lawyer met me in the lobby and we went to lunch. A double cheeseburger and 2 pints of beer. Now that the restraining order was lifted because the divorce was final and I was free to come and go as and where I pleased. The remainder of my sentence, in excess of 1 year and 1 day, was suspended, which meant I did not have to report to a police officer or report to the court. I was completely free. Liam, I'm just telling you this so you know and don't misunderstand, Jake told me later that evening over a beer. That arrogant bastard threw a couple of punches at your ex-wife a couple of weeks ago and then claimed she fell from the stairs. She agreed with this story, but no one believes it. Well, her grass is definitely greener on the other side of the fence, isn't it? I told him. He just looked at me strangely. Well, son, I know you don't like her now, but when I heard about it, I just tried to remember the girl I met when you 2 first came to town. I wouldn't wish that vile son of a bitch on anyone as a husband. Jake was right, of course. I hate that bitch for what she did, but I loved her for a long time. It's damn hard to go through life like this. My parents went through something similar when I was little. My mom had an affair and they broke up for a while because of it. After my mom died, we had a long conversation about life and expectations. Dad told me he hated her for what she did, but he still loved her. The only way to get through all of this, from his point of view, was to either find another woman to love or find a way to live with the woman he already loved. It devastated my mother as much as it devastated my father, but in the end, they found a way to create real peace in their lives. He had to choose one or the other. He couldn't just languish like that. I decided to find peace with a good new woman. Sherry has been flirting with me ever since I returned to my old job. Jake was true to his word. He kept my position open until I was able to get back into it, and I was forever grateful. Sherry was a couple of years younger than me and managed the logistics team at the plant. We had the same work schedule, so we often bumped into each other, and one Friday afternoon I decided to ask her out. That evening I picked her up early, and we went to dinner at a new steakhouse out of town. She was dressed to impress, and to be honest, I was as nervous as a schoolboy on his first date with a girl. I haven't been with any woman other than Linda for the last 11 years, and I certainly haven't been intimate with anyone in the last 12 months.